All right. Welcome everyone to our monthly data meeting. For those who don't know, my name is Aaron Bruff. I am the Director of Data and Statistics here at the State Board of Education. Again, thank you everyone for joining. I'm guessing that we'll have a couple more participants join in as we go forward. Nicole, if you could advance to the next slide. And for the agenda today, so we'll be announcing about the 2025 LEA Data Meeting dates, special education updates, address validation, Utah fits all. That will be a fun one. Final graduation rate for cohort 2024 and the December 1 data submission and training. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide and turn it over to Callista.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, just making sure. I got a new computer. So, we are just giving a brief announcement about the dates for the next calendar year's meetings. It's nothing different than it has been, but we just want to make sure that you are aware and can put those on your calendars. I believe that earlier in the year, and Nicole, you can just flip to the next slide. I believe earlier in the year, some tentative dates were sent out, and so I just wanted to make you guys aware that some of those dates might have changed. So just note that these are the ones that you should mark down. And we also will have these dates on the agenda that we send out. And so it's typically the fourth Thursday of the month. The exceptions are in yellow. The April meeting is the Spring Data Conference, and that's usually the last few years been a hybrid option so that you can go in person or virtually. And that meeting is not always on a Thursday. So once we have that date, we will give that to you as well. Other than that, those are the dates, and that is for 2025. So just giving you those now because December we will not be meeting. And that's all I have for that item. So go ahead and turn the time over to Cliff.
All right, thank you. All right, so our invalid address validations, we've talked about this over the last few months, and I wanted to give an update for everyone, especially with the December ETL coming up and where we're at with this. Go to the next slide. First off, I've got the link for the December ETL here and our guidance to where if you do have any questions or need a reminder for that, quick link there and your quick answer of that the invalid address validations are still warnings for the December finals. So as we had last said that we would not want this to be causing a problem during this finalizer period. So we are holding off until after that. And go ahead to the next slide. And without any further suspense, when it will become non-loading, or as we previously termed them as fatal errors. So this will come in on February 3rd. And these slide references below are the same ones that we've been providing, again, for the details on that. So if you do have any further questions, again, this is information that we've had in previous meetings that you can go back to and get some more details about all the specifics of each of those fields. You can reach out to us about it. You can also, of course, check our clearinghouse specification that goes through and explains all of this and what these snapshots here are from. So again, that's going to be involving the ability to have the district of residence found through the address and making sure that that information is available to support other state programs. And also just that the address is a valid address, which also helps support all of the auditing purposes and things like that, that as a state, we're challenged with to make sure that we can keep the funding coming for all of the students and schools. And again, that's still available through the physical address line 1. There's not an intent to change that yet. We do plan to retire that after all SISs have said that it's redundant. But until that point, we want to make sure that everybody has all opportunities to fulfill it either through the dedicated new fields, which we've made, the GPS latitude, GPS longitude, or geocode, or you can still stuff it into that physical address line 1. Let me check if there's anything that anybody wanted to ask about. I've got a question here. Is there a reason that some addresses keep coming back up, even though there might be a geocode? And I have talked to Sam about these. He shows that they're added, but are still on our warnings. So I would say with that, please give us those references, reach out to us, and we'll look into those and try to get you information back specifically about them. I can't give any high-level details on that because we do believe that we've made good progress on it. And go ahead to the next slide. So I guess before we hit this, let me just give a moment if there are any questions on that first. If anybody has any concerns that they would like to bring up, that I can give you a moment to talk about that, talk about the date if you're going to have any problems with meeting that. Does anybody have any concerns? All right. Then I guess we can move on to UFA. Thank you. So the Utah Fits for All Scholarship, also known as UFA. Go ahead and go to the next slide. There's been a lot of questions about how this should be handled, what USB's role is in this, potentially what guidance we can and should be giving. So I wanted to go through this in detail. So this is going to get a little bit down to the words as they're, very specifically chosen out to try to represent this as best as we can for what our role is. So excuse me for switching over to reading on this, but I'll be trying to follow this verbatim. The Utah State Board of Education can provide guidance on the collection of the data by the local education agencies, the validation of enrollment, and the sharing of this information with the Utah Fits for All Scholarship Program. However, USB's role is limited to the offering of recommendations and best practices on the current legislative framework. The USBE can advise LEAs on how to accurately collect and report student enrollment data, ensuring that it aligns with the requirements set forth by the legislature. Additionally, USBE can share methods for validating enrollment data to minimize errors and discrepancies. Ultimately, the definitive criteria and processes for determining UFA eligibility are governed by the legislature, and USB's guidance serves to support LEAs in complying with these legislative mandates. So I'm going to take some pauses here. Some of the questions may get answered through as I go further, but just because these are fairly dense, I want to give people an opportunity to jump in and ask any specifics, even if it will be something covered later. Have I lost anyone yet? Okay, let's go ahead to the next slide. So UFA ineligibility. I'll not go too detailed on this one because it jumps into the exact references for it, but that this one is important to know what makes them eligible or ineligible. And I provided the code references here for that. If we have them and they're not enrolled in a local education agency, an LEA, or the SOEP program, that means that they are eligible. If they are enrolled in either of the two, that's where we're going to get into some more of the details, and that's where some of that code also is covering some of those details. And there's current work which is going through to make sure that the code is covering all the real world cases the best that they should, as this is the first year for the program, and we are doing a bit of learning and understanding how this is getting built out and how it's working for each of the different providers. So you can expect that that will continue to change and that these code references will continue to mature. All right, go to the next slide. So UFA students are ineligible when an active enrollment is sent through the clearinghouse data, which is then loaded into the UTREX system. An active enrollment means that the student has any course in the school year with days attended. If the course has an exit date in the past, it generally will not be considered to prevent UFA eligibility. Some considerations are actively being determined, and again, will be clarified in legislation. So that's not a 100%. The term generally is used specifically because it may be in most cases, but it's not in all cases that exiting in the past is going to be enough to then give eligibility. We may still have to work with you on some of those specifics, and we're still working through some of those specifics in legislation right now. USB is responsible for providing the ability to check students for enrollment in public education, including LEA and SOEP enrollment for students applying for or granted a UFA scholarship. UFA is required to take action, suspending accounts of students awarded that are found to be ineligible. That's again also left broad. Ineligibility can come from us. There can be other forms of them becoming ineligible, which some of that is referenced out onto their own site and would be good to dig into, especially if you're a UFA provider, understanding what they have for the eligibility, and also going back into the code to make sure that you also understand what legislation has said. This is what's causing them to be eligible or ineligible, especially as we've gotten past our October 1st timeframe. It now means that the UTREX data is more solid and able to be referenced out for that eligibility. So you'll see a lot more suspensions and hear of a lot more suspensions that are currently being investigated and worked with. And we are actively, again, taking any of those calls and helping work through any of those situations with parents to make sure that they understand what's caused them to be ineligible, where they're ineligible, and also trying to work with legislation on how that transparency can be shared is, again, the primary point of in becoming ineligible is UFA, so they are the point of contact, and USB is not a point of contact for providing this information. We will, however, try to, again, assist where we're able to and empowered by legislation at this point. Any questions yet? I haven't seen anything else come up. All right, go ahead to the next slide. So UFA accurate data. USB's accuracy in validating enrollments will require receiving the clearinghouse data accurately. Accurate data means, and this is a bit straightforward and hopefully easy to catch, but it basically means that we don't receive UFA students in the clearinghouse data. That also means we don't receive their courses. It means that we don't receive their enrollments in those courses or the attendance of being in those courses. None of that information is meant to be sent to UTREX, to the public education system for anything other than the purposes of our ability to provide enrollment validation. So we have a direct connection with UFA to be able to get that enrollment information. And again, that information isn't stored within UTREX and doesn't become a part of UTREX. When LEAs are sending that data then gets into UTREX, and that then becomes a potential risk for everyone involved, that there could be a PII breach of the understanding of who that student's data was meant to be shared with. And that student data is allowed, again, for us strictly for identifying enrollment, but it's a lot harder to control that aspect from within the UTREX system. Hence the reason why it's never been intended to get into that system. Go ahead to the next slide. UFA provider questions for the UTREX use. So this is a slide which was previously sent out in September. So if you want to go back to an earlier conversation about this is jumping into some of those details. And most of the remaining part of my slide deck for this is going to be also reissued out from the September guidance. So can I send the UFA data on the collections to UTREX? And we just kind of answered that a moment ago, but that's no. And that the data collections the UTREX has, they're not intended to be able to get the enrollments, the students, the courses, or their outcomes. So no student records should be sent over, with an exclusion that you can still send an exit record. So the S1 record has the S1X record, which shows them exiting, and the correct codes for this, which we have gotten a lot of questions on and concerns still past September about this. So I'm hoping that maybe this can trickle down to all the secretaries and the people data entering to make sure that they're aware of what codes to be using here for this, and that's that they are exiting into private school or homeschool, as you're only eligible for UFA if you are in homeschool or private school. So they do need to exit into one of those two, whichever is most appropriate for what they're doing. And then again, that you don't send the transcript data for UFA, again, back with the outcomes, and you don't send the courses or any course membership for that UFA courses. Go ahead to the next slide. Additional UFA provider questions on the SIS and UTREX. Can I load UFA student data into my current SIS? And that's yes, but only if it's accessible to the data restrictions which are expected. And that's that it's a need to know for that information. So UFA courses, students, enrollments, teachers, outcomes, all are not supposed to be visible to non-UFA awarded students, parents, or non-UFA teachers. Again, this is an area which could have some growth in legislation, but this is what we have at this point to be able to share for its intent and purpose, of that the UFA courses were originally intended to not be so much of a commingled situation, and that there's a lot of conversation currently going on to make sure that that's clarified and what's allowed and acceptable. And I'm not going to speak towards that now, but just saying this is what the intent was for the UFA, And we'll see what sort of outcomes we get through legislation about this. So UFA students are not allowed part-time enrollment in public school. That part's solid in legislation. UFA data may not be included in any non-UFA centric report. I think that part should be very obvious that you shouldn't report on UFA students again to these other places. UFA students utilizing providers that are also public LEA, it does not entitle them to programs not also available to private school or homeschool students not attending the LEA. So by being at the district as UFA only, it doesn't provide you any of the district resources that aren't available to just the public in general. It doesn't give anything such as child nutrition program or other state-ran programs. As a UFA provider, the organization is not an agent of the state, and they aren't acting on behalf of the state. They're acting on behalf of this separate organization providing for UFA. So we've got a question here in the chat. If a student completes a course through UFA and then decides to come back to public school, do we accept the transcript for the course, which would then be sent to UTREX? That's a good question. I would say the transcript you would be getting would have to come from the parent themselves. It wouldn't be coming from a source. It wouldn't be coming from a district. It wouldn't be coming from a school. It would have to come from just the parent themselves. As again, those providers aren't entitled, that I'm aware of at this point in time, to be sharing that student information out to anyone except for, again, the parent and the student. So it's a good question, and I think we'll probably need to go back to legislation to ensure whether or not it's something that would be accepted into the transcript system. Right, go ahead to the next slide. Can UFA students still request assessments? And that answer is a very clear yes. They have the same rights for requesting assessment that everyone in the state of Utah has, in which case the parent or guardian would contact the student's district for the request. And as a note, this does not include needing to go out onto the clearinghouse. The district's request for that happens independently and doesn't mean enrollment into the district or needing to pass through into the clearinghouse. If people have more detailed questions on how to do that, some of that may come into being a little bit of a SIS specific question, and please open a ticket with us or reach out to us and we can try to give you some further guidance and direction on how that's happening, how it's happening currently for other private school students or homeschool students. That again, this method has been around for many years. So I won't try to dig in too hard on that for the time being. So we do have a few other questions coming in. How would a student be rostered for testing if the record is not sent to UTREX? And that would be independently and directly. So it would be more of a direct contact between the district and to the assessment provider and connecting through that means rather than it going through the state for getting into the state's roster system for that. And then the next question we've got is, but for rostering state tests, do we have to send them through UTREX? So again, the guidance that I still have on this is that I'm not aware of any instances where that's a needed required aspect. We can continue to dig in and let you know if there are any specifics that change from that. But at this point in time, my understanding is still that this is going to be handled independently for each of those students. rather than through the existing electronic system for the rostering. Go ahead.
Cliff, if I could interrupt here a second, this is Drew from Park City. Because when we've done homeschool students who've requested a test, we've been told by USB that we have to send them in through Utrecht. That's the only way we can roster those kids into like RISE, for instance. There isn't another way for us to manually RISE them that I'm aware of. So that goes against the guidance you're saying here. We're saying we shouldn't send them in. We've previously been told we have to. So we've had to enroll them into a class for a couple of days so that they'll be able to be rostered to test. So we're going to need clarification on this one.
Oh,
Okay.
Sorry, I don't know how to raise my hand in Zoom, so.
Sorry, I'm hearing somebody talking, but I'm not getting it very clearly.
Oh, sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so we do have set process for rostering private and homeschool students for assessment, and it does go through Utrecht. We have met with the program manager for UFA. Darren Nielsen was there, everybody was there. So we are just using the same process you would use for private school students to roster students for assessment. It does come through Utrecht, but they don't have attendance. They are just rostered as private school students in the school. The 995, I believe, is the school. So they will not, it will not affect their UFA status. It is a separate it's a separate process. But you will need to send the student information through Utrecht. And I can put the private school rostering manual link in the chat so people will know the process.
Great. Thank you. And I appreciate the feedback, and we'll get this slide corrected to where that's not misrepresenting downstream. So good call out, and we'll make sure that we get that represented correctly, that it will still come through the clearinghouse as Maureen's guided, and that we do have a link there for on the proper direction for doing that. Great. The last comment we had was, again, a call out of catching my mistake there of that whenever we've rostered a homeschool student for a state assessment, we've done it through submitting them to Utrecht as a homeschool student. So yes, please continue to follow the existing process, making sure that, again, that they're coming through for the homeschool or private school, whichever is the closest association. At this point in time, there is not anything coming through on our clearinghouse that's going to be labeling scholarship students separately. So they would still just fall into one of those two categories at this time. Something may change in the future, but for now, they would still need to fall into one of those two categories.
I had a quick question. It's close
Yeah.
to, I know I've had LEAs reaching out to me because there was a team at USPE, I believe Marlene, that was sending out letters to them because they were flagged as having students enrolled in Utrecht. So I just wanted to make sure that now, after this guidance from Maureen, that those aren't going to get flagged. They were getting letters saying that the student wasn't eligible for UFA, so just that the code takes into account.
So I'm not going to be able to give any clear, those students won't be flagged, as it's going to come down into the data. So what we had talked about before of not having attendance days for the students that Maureen had clarified, that is one of our considerations, and that will give us an ability to see if that student is actually showing up for a class, attending something, or if it is potentially just for the assessment purpose only. So That's at least one indicator that we have right now, data-wise, that we're watching for to try to catch this as we're getting, again, further guidance and understanding about how to catch those situations for assessments specifically coming in through UFA.
Well, the specific thing that was being flagged was on the courses, and Marlene, not to be confused with Maureen, was
Yep.
telling LEAs to put a course exit date. But then she was saying an exit code, which is on the student record. So anyways, I was a little confused myself.
Sure. Again, they're not eligible to be in UFA if they're in a public funded course. So if that course is only for the assessment purpose, and that assessment, again, isn't bringing in any attendance and causing any funding directions for that, there isn't any conflicts in there. And I think that we can work through with the data to make sure that we're understanding and getting to the bottom of that with each of the parents. If the districts are sending them as being attending for those courses, then we are going to be in still an immediate area of that they can't be enrolled and actively showing up to a public school course. And that will cause them to have to be choosing between UFA and that course.
Okay, so the coding on the instructions from Maureen and assessment, those are not going to be flagged as
They
enrollments
won't
in
be
each.
flagged. Yeah, they shouldn't be flagged if, at least again, from our side, again, most of the flagging which is happening is coming through from UFA and from our guidance on showing what students are enrolled. So there is a bit of downstream direction there, and our being able to provide the best and most accurate information to them will include us being able to detect and show that these are just for assessment purposes. So I would also welcome that if anyone wants to shoot me an email with any specific examples of any UFA students which were entered in for just assessments, I would be happy to take a look at that and to make sure that we can use that as a use case and also discuss for what sort of data attributes are going to make these clear for us.
Leah, this is Paula.
Go ahead,
I was
Paul.
also working with Marlene, and I don't believe she was flagging any students that were being submitted by a homeschool code 995 or 990.
Okay.
Thanks, Paula. That helps. Thank you.
All right. So great conversation. Does anybody else have anything they want to add before we move on? I think we've all gotten a little bit more clarity by reviewing this slide again. All right, go ahead to the next slide. All right, so I think this was asked earlier. UFA students are always able to re-enter public school. So if they are in UFA and they choose to leave UFA at any point in time, even if it's the day after they spent their UFA funds, we still do not prevent them from returning to public school. That's not something that the state does. The opportunity for public school will always be there. Unless any legislation changes on that in the future, that can be solidly expected. Go to the next slide. So again, I mentioned this before, but output from UFA courses. Who do you share UFA student courses outcomes to? Only student and the parent guardian. You do not provide it back to UFA. So UFA is registered providers still do not give their grades and outcomes back to UFA. So again, this is guidance which UFA will let you know as a provider, but this can also be shared for myself as UFA has been very clear on this as well. and the legislation is also clear that it doesn't ask for them to do so. It also is not something that USBE is taking at this point in time. So the question about if we could take transcripts after the case, at this point in time, there's nothing that says that we should be doing so. And that there's not accreditation that's lined up with those sources for those courses or grades as a UFA provider. You know, even if it's the same course that has accreditation being provided as a district, that's still an area that's not been determined through legislation, is something that should be done. So further guidance may come down through where that may become possible. Maybe that would come through on a transcript at some point in time. But again, it's also not going to any government, U.S. Department of Government education agencies. So this information doesn't pass on up and above, such as LEA data that goes in for national reporting and for financial purposes. This information is not going to do that and will not be a part of any such funding purposes. All right, go to the next slide. So this is a catch-all for people who aren't as familiar with this or want to become more familiar. Here at the end to give some details about the UFA program, the legislation code for it, the overall area of, if I've been, explaining this for the last, 20 minutes and you weren't sure what I was even talking about. This is something that was beginning in 2024, 2025 school year, this school year, that the Utah Fits for All Scholarship Program provides up to $8,000 to Utah K through 12 students through an educational savings account. And the scholarship accounts may be used for allowable education expenses and services, including but not limited to private school tuition fees, tutoring services, testing fees, materials, and curriculum costs or other contracted services. Then there's further code again for reference for UFA, and also a link out to their website where you can get direct information, or if you're interested in becoming a provider or having your students participate, that's a link for reference for you. So this brings my presentation to an end. So I'm going to open it up if anybody has anything that they wanted to ask but hasn't yet before we move on. Okay, I'll go ahead and hand back up. Okay, we got one here. Final clarification, we are a provider, we don't report to the CRDC. As far as with the UFA student data, you don't report that to anybody. Does that answer your clarification? Again, your data should be provided to the awardee, the student, and to the parents or guardian of that student. But outside of that, you shouldn't be exposing their data, and it should be up to the parent to be able to then share that if there's any further purpose of sharing those personal outcomes. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, I think I'm the next. I'm Stephanie. On behalf of Malia, I will be presenting this section today. So in the next several slides, we're going to talk about parentally placed in private school data collection. Next slide, please. So who will be involved? First of all, special ed students enrolled by parents in private schools which may be entitled to special ed services as outlined in the USB Special Ed Rule 4. Districts with nonprofit private schools located within their boundaries, they must report data on students evaluated for special ed services by January 2025 through UPIPS. Next slide, please. There is a virtual training scheduled on December 4th at 2 p.m. for district special ed directors. This training will include data, program, and physical requirements regarding private school students. We welcome anyone else who are interested in to attend beside special ed directors. If so, please coordinate with your special ed directors or reach out to Malia in USBE. Here is her email address. Next slide, please. So I'll turn it over to Calista and David.
Real quick, can you go back 2 slides for just a second? Okay, thank you.
Okay, I just have some quick announcements about the graduation rate for cohort 2024. So next slide, please. So we did run the final grad rate. All LEAs were sent 2 files through Move It. I gave the date just for reference in case you get a notification in your email, or if not, if you have to go to Move It directly. You do have to have access to the SURF and accountability folder, but those were sent out on November 5th. The 2 files, one is student level data, and then the second file is the aggregates by school, and then your total LEA grad rate data. So you were able to preview that prior to the public release. The public release happened this week, 3 days ago on Monday. And so that was released to the public. The second place, if you don't have access to Move It, is the data gateway. If you have the correct role, and you can contact me if you should have that role and don't. But there is a graduation preview report, which we updated with the final cohort data after the October submission. So there's those 2 places that you can review that. We will get our website reports updated in the next few weeks, but for now you can view the data in those 2 places. Next slide. So this just goes over the other reporting places that you can look at the grad rate data. So as I said, we updated the preview report. You can find that once you're logged into Data Gateway under the My Tools dropdown. And that report basically gets updated twice a year. The first time is after July, and that's the preliminary data. And then the second time is after October, which is the final data. The rest of the year, that report is grayed out. Another place, like I talked about, was the Move It. It's the LEA distribution folder. It's the same exact data as in the Data Gateway graduation preview report. So that's just 2 places to look at it, same data. It has student level and aggregate level data. And then the year-round reports, those are just always available, but for the timing on that, you wouldn't be able to see cohort 2024 because once the new school year runs or rolls over in UTREX, that report shows the current school year. and then 3 years beyond that. So that report right now will not show you the final data for 2024. Next slide. Additionally, there's also a graduate for 5 years report. We did run that as well. And we do get asked this time to time. The grad rate for 5 years is not really used for anything. There's an accountability purpose, but other than that, it's not really something that we publicly report. But that report is there. It basically only applies to students that were retained in their final cohort year, and it gives them an extra year to see if they graduated or not. So the one we ran for this year would have looked at any student that was retained in the 2023 cohort, and then it basically sees what happened in 2024. And so if they graduated, they were able to count as a graduate in the 5-year rate. Anything else would have been a dropout. So for most LEAs, their 5-year rate isn't really all that different from their 4-year rate. There is also a written PDF report with the grad rate data, which can be found on the website. And that's already up on there for those that are interested. There is an appendix at the end, and it has all the LEA and school level data, but I believe it is masked. And then there is a Tableau report as well, which I know David already updated. So for those that want to look at it in Tableau, it does have the cohort 2024 final data. We will have the LEA and school level data available. Well, actually, I believe this slide was made prior to the public release, so that should also be available at this point. So that is final and available. So if you have any questions for me about your LEA's grad rate, or if on specific students, you can reach out to myself or David, and we're happy to look at those. But yes, that the 2024 rate is done. Next slide, please. And that's all I have for grad rates. Are there any questions on that? Or you can reach out to me individually if you prefer. All right, well, I'll just keep going if there's no questions for graduation rate items. So the next and last part of our meeting is the December 1 upload. So we do have that coming up. And this one's a little tricky because it falls sort of around the holidays, right? After Thanksgiving and before Christmas. And this one is heavy on special ed data. So we just ask that for the UTREX people, if it's a different team that reviews special ed data in your LEA, like you have a special ed director that needs to be involved in the December submission, if you can just make sure to communicate these dates, that way everyone can get their data in on time. So the deadline this year actually falls on a Monday, the 9th, and that's because the usual date is the 7th, and that's on a weekend this year. So you get a couple extra days. The finalizer will be turned on, which there's a later slide, but I'll just say it here. It gets turned on the 2nd, which is a Monday. So you basically have 7 days a week to get that finalized. Historical updates, as always, for a guaranteed completion are due 2 weeks prior. We don't usually see a ton of those at this time of year, but if for some reason you had an update that you really wanted done before your submission, you would just need to get that in by Monday, the 25th, which is this Monday. All right, next slide. Some announcements for this year. So we will be, Data and Statistics will be starting courtesy data reviews this Monday, which is the week of Thanksgiving. So I always like to tell LEAs to, even if you're going to be out that week or for a few days, please pay attention to your emails when you come back, because those can get buried and we don't want the courtesy data review to go unnoticed. So just make sure those will be sent out Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of next week, which is right before Thanksgiving. We may be finishing up the last few reviews that Friday, the day after Thanksgiving. So those should be going out next week. So even if you're out, just make sure to look at your email. And then you can request additional reviews at any point before the deadline up through the 9th, and we're happy to do that. This is just something that we announced for Power School users because we've seen this issue in the past. Hopefully it isn't something that will happen this year to anyone, but and we don't even necessarily know why, but the regular percent field, which is on the Scram record, we've seen that those values basically get flipped. So all of the values that should be regular %1 show up as regular %3. And it's not something that we would really catch in doing the courtesy data review. So you have to have a careful eye on those counts. And we've only seen it happen on the Power School SIS. And it's not something that you can fix. It's something that has to happen in the SIF agent and by our IT staff. So we just need to know if it's happening. That way we can get it fixed as soon as possible. We have had it where LEAs have finalized and those values were flipped. And Malia caught it, after the deadline to finalize. So LEAs had to resubmit, get it fixed, and then, refinalize. So that's just something if you're on Power School to pay attention to, make sure those counts look correct and not opposite of what they should be. Next slide. Okay, this is a reminder specific to this year, just because last year was the first year that we started collecting kindergarten type data as a required field for all 3 submissions. It used to only be required at year end. And last year, the validation was changed so that it has to be sent in October and December as well. So while it's not going to affect funding for anything related to the December submission, we still want those to be submitted correctly. That way LEAs are in the habit of just getting those right, because they are crucial in both October and year end. And we noticed that this October, there were a lot of LEAs that didn't get those right. And so please, please, please make sure that the half day and full day counts are being reviewed. We find that many SIS systems default either to full day or half day. And so if you don't go in and change it, it's just the validation won't trigger because there's a value there, but it doesn't mean that the value is correct. So if you're submitting 100% full day and your LEA doesn't have 100% full day kindergarten, then those need to be changed, or vice versa. So please make sure to review those all year long. Next slide. All right, so now we'll just go through the things that we review on the courtesy data review, as a reminder for everyone of what they should be thinking about as you prepare to get your data ready to finalize. There's not as many items in December as there are in October year end. So we'll go over those now, me and Stephanie. So next slide. Okay, and so Stephanie, go ahead.
The kindergarten type counts. So for the December 1 courtesy data reviews, we'll be checking kindergarten type counts in U-Tracks. Like Calista mentioned, this is not a funding item for December 1 data submission, but we still need to check it to make sure the data accuracy. We will check the half day and full day kindergarten type counts reported by your LEA. So please review and correct this data in U-Tracks before finalizing your December 1 submission. So Calista, should I turn it over to you, or should I?
Oh yeah, thanks. So for Cliff, gave some announcements about this, but we are also going to, just as a reminder, look at LEAs that have these validations. This isn't a December 1 funding item or reporting item. However, we want to keep reminding you, if you have warnings on these, that they will turn to non-loading or fatal errors, and the date now is February. So this is more just a reminder to help you get ready, because in the next few months, those will, if you have warnings now, they're going to be errors soon. So please just review, and we will review when we do the courtesy data review. If you have any district of residence or invalid address warnings, level 1 or level 2, please clear those, but also know if you're prioritizing at the end, these won't block records for the December submission. All right, next slide. Okay, immigrant counts is something that we started reviewing just last year. We hope that everyone is reporting these accurately, but we started reviewing it last year as a review item on the letter because the person in charge of looking at this data at USBE made us aware that they use these counts for funding purposes and reporting, and sometimes it's pulled from the December data. So we wanted to make sure that those are being reported accurately. So this isn't any different than any other demographic count. We will look at large changes from the prior year, or if your LEA is reporting 0 and they had a count, or you had a count, we will flag that. Next slide. These are the big ones that we need LEAs to focus on for December for funding purposes. The preschool, and then K-12, K through 12 special ed total enrollment counts. These do need to be accurate before you finalize, because this will be for funding. So as always, fatal errors, depending on what the fatal error is and what it's blocking, they should be cleared in most cases. To be included in the December 1 count, the criteria is that a student has to have an active Scram record as of December 1st. So basically, the Scram entry date has to be on or before December 1st. And then the Scram exit date either is blank or it's after the 1st. They also have to be between the ages of 3 and 22. There should be a validation on that. But just as a reminder, Malia likes us to mention that the birth date that's used on determining that age is from the SSID system. So you want to make sure that the birth date that's in your SIS matches what is in the SSID system. And sometimes it's not intentional, but there can just be a data entry error because there's 2 places. So make sure that those birth dates do align. The other criteria to be included in the count, you can't have environment code P. And then similar to October, you can't have school of record no on the student record. All right, next slide. So the next thing that we'll look at after the total special ed counts are the service fields, which are all on the SCRAM record or S2 record in UTREX. So those are time, regular, percent, and environment. All of those fields and definitions are in the UTREX specifications, as well as the valid code values. But the reason that they're important is because they're used in the OSEP indicator measures. So what we look for on those three fields are large or unexpected changes with how those codes are being reported. An example is, well, usually there are exceptions to this, but generally we'll see majority time A in elementary school settings and a more equal distribution between time A and B in middle school and then usually the self-contained count is the largest in high school settings. Again, that's just a general pattern. It's not always the case. So if we put it in your review letter, it doesn't mean that it's wrong, but we're just asking you to review it. And it's better to be safe and just review it and make sure that it is entered correctly. Next slide. Another field that we look at on the SCRAM record is the 1% flag. We did review this in October, but it is crucial that these are correct in the December submission. It's important because it's used for test rostering, for projecting the alternate assessment rates, monitoring, and then there's other purposes that the special ed department uses these counts for. So we will look for what your LEA reported last December and compare that to what's in UTREX currently and see if there's anything that looks off, or if you have 0 currently and last year you had a count. Disability types that cannot be reported as is 1% are the BD and SL codes. We did put a validation on this. It didn't used to be the case, but now these should just be automatically blocked. And so we don't put that as a letter item anymore because the validation takes care of it. But just know that if you are the disability type BD or SL, you cannot be is 1%. So if the IEP team is giving that as the disability type, then it probably needs to be reevaluated because that cannot be submitted to UTREX. And just as a reference, we don't have very many in the state that are actually getting this validation. I wasn't able to check today because the collection progress report was having issues, but last week, 7 days ago, there was only 4 students in the entire state which were getting that error. So, but just make sure if you are one of the LEAs that has those 4 students getting the error, those need to be cleared so that those SCRAM records can get into UTREX before you finalize. It also could just be a data entry error, so it might not be that the IEP team needs to update anything. It could be that, but it also could just be a data entry error. All right, next slide. So moving away from special ed data, in December, the homeless counts are crucial for funding. So again, we want them to be accurate in October and year end, but in December, that's where the funding is based. So they do need to be correct. We look for, again, large changes from the prior year, especially if it decreased. And then any LEAs that are reporting 0 when they really shouldn't be, either because it's a big district or there was a count last year, we will flag that. And again, just ask you to review it. Next slide. Okay, and now I will turn the time back to Stephanie.
Thank you, Calista. So in the next several slides, we're going to talk about the Acadian's beginning of year data. For BOY rating, we suggest you enter the intervention and the rating on grade level status now to reduce your burden of entering them all at once at year end. If a student doesn't have an Acadian's rating test record, we need to know why. This is also where you report alternate assessment statuses. Failing to do so would result in the student being treated as untested in participation rate calculations. Two or three files you can check for this data. One is the school summary cumulative report, in which you can check aggregated counts. The other one is the examine data file, also the rating on grade level for UGG report. In both reports, you can review student level data on who have not yet had a BOY or intervention data. If a student doesn't have a rating intervention entered by year end, it will become a fatal error. Next slide, please. So our suggestions for BOY rating also apply to BOY math. The only difference is that you cannot check rating on grade level for UGG report for math because it obviously only contains rating test info. Next slide, please. Here are some important Acadian's BOY fields that needs to be filled out. First one is the rating grade level. For grade 1, 2, and 3, if the student doesn't have a beginning of year test result in the Acadian's vendor return file, one of the rating on grade level codes must be reported to explain the lack of vendor test results for the BOY test session. Rating intervention, that is required to enter for grade 1 to 3. That indicates whether the student was given a rating intervention in the LEA at any time during the school year. So all LEA must report rating grade level, beginning of the year, middle year, and end of the year, and the rating intervention by April 15 or the first school day thereafter. The early numeracy status and the early numeracy interventions will have the same requirements. Next slide, please. So here are some resources that would be very helpful for your December 1 submission. The UTRAC's December guidelines give you a general idea about what December 1 submission is, the deadlines, your responsibilities, significant data points to review, and how to make historical data correction. The UTRAC's specification is the most important technical manual that specifies all UTRAC's fields, business rules, changes, validations, etc. Most questions that you have during UTRAC's data submission can be answered by searching through this doc. The UTRAC's quick guide provides you high-level steps on submitting data through UTRACS or Data Gateway. And the last two email addresses that you can contact with if you have any questions or concerns about data submission. I think that'll be all for today's training. So Calista, do you have anything else, or somebody else, do you have any questions? Please let us know.
Yeah, if anyone has questions, we can take those, and then I'll just say, so we have it's less than 3 weeks before the December submission deadline, so just keep in mind that that's coming up pretty quickly. The finalizer will be turned on Monday the 2nd, which is just coming back from Thanksgiving. So please start to think about this, and again, involve your special ed directors or teams that need to review these data because that deadline is fast approaching. You can also reach out to us. And if you don't reach out to us, we will be sending those courtesy data reviews next week. And so look for that in your emails. And that's all we have. So we can hang on for a few questions. Otherwise, we will not be meeting in December. We will next see you in the new year. And so thank you, everybody.